Welcome to USC Trojans Primetime Live here at the Voice of College Football. Our apologies for being late. We're a growing company. We're a growing organization, and with that growth comes growing pains. A little bit more on that later, but we want to just dive right into the topics of the day for USC Football. I'm Matt Zemek. He's Ethan Inman. And, so we come at you Wednesdays at 10 Eastern, or tonight it's 10:23 Eastern, 7 Pacific usually. And so this being a Wednesday show, it's pretty neat when we get a huge story on Tuesday. So it's really fresh on everyone's mind. We can just carry that right into the start of the show. So Ethan Inman, the big news, Benny Wiley, strength coach, he's out of here. And plenty to say on this. So I will certainly have my say in the course of time, but let's just start off with your immediate reaction, and then we'll dive into the particulars of this very eye-opening news story at USC Football.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it was something that kind of shocked me, to be honest. I have talked to tons of different USC players over the years, and it feels like they're always talking about Benny and talking about how much they like him. So he seems like someone that was really beloved throughout the program. And it's not even, it's times that I don't even ask about him. They just love bringing him up, love kind of bragging on him, talking about him, all of that. It's also kind of a crazy time for it to happen. I mean, it makes sense in some degree, given that it's the end of spring practice, but it is a little late. They had this incoming class of players and let Benny stick around for the whole spring window, and then now are firing him pretty late. So all of that is a little bit surprising. I think I don't know how to feel about it yet. I think obviously there was some issues in terms of performance and conditioning, and especially the size of some of these players. It showed up a lot last year against these Big Ten opponents. So you'd love to see somebody come in who can help beef up these players significantly, a lot more than they already are. But yeah, I think that the timing is a little interesting, and that makes me hesitate a little bit if it was the right move or not. I do think, though, it's a good sign that the university, whether this is Lincoln Riley, whether this is Chad Bowden, whether this is Jen Cohen, is not giving Lincoln Riley staffers that came over with him from Oklahoma a super long leash. I think it's a good sign that if these guys don't perform, Lincoln Riley doesn't get to just keep them around forever and ever. And, because he kept Grinch around too long. This is a guy who Lincoln's worked with for a really long time. He came over with Lincoln, obviously, in 2022 when Lincoln was hired, but he was also Oklahoma's director of sports performance for 4 years from 2018 to 2021. They worked together at Texas Tech with Mike Leach as well. So he's somebody who Lincoln's worked with pretty closely, so that probably made it pretty difficult. He's also someone that it sounds like the players really loved. Trojan superstars like Caleb Williams and Kamari Ramsey have both come out and talked about how much they love Coach Wiley. And like I said, I've heard from a lot of players the same thing. So he's obviously a very beloved guy in the building. So I think it's pretty clear that this is a football move and not a personality move or a personnel move. He's someone who has built great relationships. So I think that is something positive to focus on about this, and something that moving forward, again, I think the university has shifted now to where it's not trust Lincoln Riley. It's we need to get the best people in the building, and nothing, these are some of these guys who have moved on or been fired, like Coach Wiley, are reputable guys that have a lot of talent. But it's not going to cut it if you're not the best of the best here at USC. So I think that part of it is a good message that's being sent. But again, just the timing and, some of the other things make it a little bit circumstantially weird. But I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts, Matt, and I'm sure that the viewers really want to hear those. So,
well, we'll get to them in a bit, but here's my main follow-up question, Ethan, and that is, I'm certainly thinking that this was a Chad Bowden move, not a Lincoln Riley move, because Benny Wiley was Lincoln's guy. You briefly alluded to that. I mean, it feels less like a collaborative, consultative move and more of the new regime saying, Lincoln, You have to eat your vegetables. You're no longer fully, you're in charge of coaching up the team. We're in charge of the structure and the support group. Like, we're giving you the best structural foundation for doing your job, but and it's up to you to coach, but let the administrators do the administrative work and make those decisions. Your thoughts on that general dynamic inside the room at USC?
I think the timing certainly suggests that, Matt. Like I said, him getting fired now after spring ball makes it seem like this was like Chad Bowden comes in the fall, not in the fall, and in the winter after the season ends, and then he sees a couple of months of practice, sees that things aren't, up to par, up to what things that were happening at Notre Dame, that kind of thing, and he, at least strongly suggests that there should be a change of personnel. So that would make me think yes. We've obviously seen Lincoln Riley in the recent past, move on from Alex Grinch and move on to Danton Lynn. So it's not like Lincoln Riley with, pre-Chad Bowden that this was unheard of for him to do. So I wouldn't rule it out entirely, but I do think based on the timing, that's like a fair assumption, I would say.
Yeah, so in terms of my overall assessment of this, first off, I think we just have to put it out on the table, right? Like, we shouldn't just indirectly allude to it. We should put it out there. Since November of 2021, USC fans and Oklahoma fans have been, knocking antlers. We know this. It's been a very public and open thing, and USC fans just need to admit, hey, like, on this point, we don't have to talk about others, but on this point, the Oklahoma fans and the Oklahoma analysts were right. They were telling us, Benny Wiley with his yoga and his new age and all of his methods, he's not going to give you the elite offensive lines that Lincoln Riley inherited at Oklahoma. And, most USC fans know the backstory, but, some on the margins might not. This is the right time. This is the time to re-educate, remind ourselves about Lincoln Riley's career. Now, Lincoln Riley crushed it at Oklahoma. We're not relitigating that, actually, he wasn't that good. No, he was a rock star at Oklahoma. We're not trying to change that particular point. But there's a big but. When Lincoln Riley came aboard and when he became head coach and Bob Stoops handed over the keys, Lincoln Riley in that first 2017 season, when he, rose to prominence, he made the first of his 3 straight college football playoff berths. In 2017, that was the team that lost to Georgia in that classic Rose Bowl playoff semifinal. It's a game that Oklahoma frankly should have won, led most of the way, let it slip away late. But, that was the elite Oklahoma offense, the best offense that Lincoln Riley's had in his career, and it was his best offense at Oklahoma with Baker Mayfield and just a lot of other horses. But the strength coach for Oklahoma in that 2017 season was not Benny Wiley. It was Jerry Schmidt, and he's the guy who built up Oklahoma when Lincoln Riley came in under Bob Stoops as the offensive coordinator for a couple seasons. Learned the ropes, got to the playoff as a coordinator. And helped Baker Mayfield become a number 1 NFL draft pick. Jerry Schmidt was the guy who laid the foundation, and Benny Wiley then came. Lincoln Riley brought Benny Wiley in 2018 and 2019, and you could really draw a comparison here between Oklahoma and USC with Lincoln Riley in both cases. That in 2018 and 2019, it was less about Benny Wiley doing such a great job. It was more about how these guys were formed, cultivated, physically developed by Jerry Schmidt. Benny Wiley inherited those groups in 2018 and 2019. Now, he didn't mess it up, but it's not as though Benny Wiley was the guy who coached those guys up from scratch. You then translate that to the 2022 season at USC. Those guys on the offensive line who helped Caleb Williams win the Heisman Trophy, helped USC make the Pac-12 championship game, helped the Trojans win 11 games, go to a New Year's Six Bowl, all that stuff. Benny Wiley inherited that as well. So in both cases, at Oklahoma and USC, Benny Wiley was there for a number of really good seasons, but as the inheritor. And it is just one of the fundamental details of coaching and results and outcomes that we always have to pay attention to. Who's the guy who coached them up from the start? And if you inherit a great bunch of players, if you inherit a great recruiting class, you definitely get credit for not screwing it up, but it's not the same as doing it yourself the whole way, carrying through a whole operation. You know, when the inherited groups graduate or go to the pros, and then it's just your guys and it's truly your program, you know, without the previous regime entering into it, what are your results? And Benny Wiley's results, very clearly, not nearly as good as the predecessors he had at Oklahoma and also at USC. So just that is the big underlying detail. And that is something that Oklahoma fans were always pointing out. They were saying, it's Jerry Schmidt. Jerry Schmidt made that offensive line. Jerry Schmidt made that program. It wasn't Benny Wiley. And that's just something that, you know, we were going to find out whether that was true or not. And on balance, the Oklahoma fans were true. So if you want to say, well, you know, those Oklahoma fans, they're just bitter, you know, and their team sucks too. Hey, their team does suck. Like, I'm not arguing with that one, okay? But you know, on that one point about the strength coach and what Lincoln Riley did and what Lincoln Riley inherited and how much did Lincoln Riley sustain, you know, Lincoln Riley's choice of riding with Benny Wiley, it didn't crush him completely, but Jerry Schmidt was the foundation. And at USC, Clay McGuire and what he did with that 2021 offensive line laid the foundation for what happened in 2022. So just, we give Benny Wiley a measure of credit for not completely messing things up when he had Cadillac resources and some really great players in those 2018, 2019 seasons at Oklahoma, and then in the 2022 season at USC. Benny Wiley deserves credit. You know, if you're there in the room and on the field, part of that staff, you definitely deserve some credit, but it's not the same as being the architect, being the originator, being the person who carries it all the way through. And so, Ethan, as we kind of continue this conversation, it just seems as though this is a continuing story. Like, this is the next chapter in Lincoln Riley being pried away from his guys, you know, the guys that he had loyalty to, the guys that he was comfortable working with. And it's really interesting that you mentioned, yes, Benny Wiley was a popular, widely liked figure in the USC locker room, in the USC training center, practice field, weight room, etc. But being liked and being comfortable with other people, certainly important. But, you know, what's the ultimate loyalty that Lincoln Riley has or is supposed to have? It's loyalty to winning. Loyalty to being the best. And this might be something that a lot of fans miss in terms of just commentary and analysis generally. I think a lot of people, when coaches, players, executives, anyone fall short of an intended goal, it's easy to think, oh, that guy's the worst ever. And commentary just goes overboard and extreme. Benny Wiley's not the worst strength coach ever, but he wasn't the best. See, that's how you calibrate it. That's the point of emphasis, is that it's not as though a lot of these guys that Lincoln Riley brought with him from Oklahoma were bad. They weren't bad. Like, they did a lot of really good stuff at Oklahoma, but were they the best? And when they went to the Big Ten, or the Big Ten kind of came along later, but going to the West Coast with its own unique challenges, with Oregon, with Washington, and the Pac-12 and everything that was going on in a rapidly improving conference in 2021. Kyle Whittingham in Utah, of course, as we know painfully well. The idea that, you know, what was good at Oklahoma in the late 2010s was just automatically going to translate. Lincoln Riley was not a very good poker player. He did not lay down the best set of cards for his situation, and that loyalty to his guys, it was not the loyalty that Lincoln Riley needed. It was loyalty to excellence, loyalty to elite standards, and he has been chasing, generally with futility, those elite standards at USC. So Ethan, my question for you is just, are there more lessons for Lincoln Riley to learn in terms of personal loyalty and the limits of that, and just, casting all that stuff aside, and let me get skull crushers at every position, whether it's strength coach, whether it's defensive coordinator, position coaches, administrators. My job is not to be liked in the room. My job is to get guys who are going to lift USC to the college football playoff. Is there anything else that Lincoln Riley still needs to learn along these lines, or is this kind of like the final bonk between the eyes?
Well, I'm glad you brought up likability, Matt, because I think that that's a good point, and that could have a lot to do with why he was kept around for so long. I think that something that casual college football fans don't realize, but diehard college football fans probably do, is that the strength coach is honestly the coach that's around a lot of these guys the most, just due to all of the rules about when they can practice and all of that stuff. So Benny Wiley deserves a lot of credit for earning kind of the respect and the just the admiration of all of the guys in the locker room, because that is part of his position. And that could be the reason why Lincoln Riley has stuck by him for such a long time, is like, well, the guys like him and the guys need to like him because they are around him so often. And there's plenty of players who've developed into elite players who have worked with Benny who like him a lot. And those testimonies, hold weight, obviously, but they are, like you said, players that oftentimes were elite before they ever worked with him, like Caleb Williams, like Kamari Ramsey. So I think that could be a big reason why, and that is something to give him credit for. And he seems like a great guy, and we all wish him nothing but the best in that regard. But I think on the staff side of things, there just aren't that many staff members left for Lincoln Riley to have to learn this lesson with anymore. They've brought in a lot of guys offseason over offseason. It feels like mostly, and especially the primary decision makers besides him, are guys that have been brought in since then. So I don't know. I don't know how many more times the lesson can be learned from a staff perspective. I think if the lesson has to be learned, it's going to have to do with play calling, which we talked about last week to a great extent, just general offensive strategy, philosophy, that kind of stuff. But I think that if the hires of Chad Bowden, the hire of Danton Lynn, Rob Ryan seems like a pretty promising hire so far, are any indication, this new strength coach could be a move in the positive direction. And I think, but we can't know for sure. And we're still waiting to see on some of these guys too, like the new offensive line coach, all of that. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's too many more lessons to learn with staff, just because there's not that many staff left that he brought over. And especially with Chad Bowden in the room now, a lot of the staff that are going to be hired are going to be more on the Bowden side of things and not on his side of things. So probably going to see, if there's any loyalty to anybody being brought in, it's going to be guys that are from Notre Dame, guys that, Bowden is familiar with more so than guys that Lincoln is familiar with, I would think, at this point. So I don't know. I don't think we have too much more staff turnover because it's Lincoln Riley loyalists left in our future, but there could still be some unrelated lessons to learn, I suppose.
One other aspect of this before we move on to other topics, and that is that, with the 2026 recruiting class being as strong as it is, number one, number two in the country pretty consistently over the past several weeks, this move also seems like a kind of, okay, if we're getting high-end groceries, we have to have the best chef, the guy who's really going to maximize what's about to come in the door. And so having a new strength coach this year, even though the 2026 recruiting class is a year away, like there has to be kind of a template laid down so that the incoming recruits can get more of a sense of what that's like. They can feel it. They can get at least some intel, some information from this year's players, and especially any player that returns next season within the program. There can be kind of a teaching, a handing down of how this goes, how the new regime's going to work. I'd have to think that is also a significant factor in the decision. And just with Lincoln Riley in particular, Ethan, it's kind of two sides of the coin. On one hand, all the things that have happened with the new GM, the new administration, new structure, new staffing, new support, all of this has taken Lincoln Riley off the hot seat for 2025 because he's going to coach that number one ranked recruiting class in 2026. And, he's wanted, the support structure, he's wanted the resources. Well, hey, he's getting them, new football facility as well. Like Lincoln Riley's getting everything that he possibly wanted. So they're not going to remove him after 2025, even if the season is a disappointment by various measurements. He's going to coach in 2026. But the flip side is, okay, Lincoln, you're going to coach in 2026. You have at least 2 years at USC. But in the exchange is you have less control over things. We're going to tell you what to do. We're going to tell you how all of this goes. It's a fascinating combination of tension points for Lincoln Riley. Okay, you're getting 2 years no matter what, but there are trade-offs and there is a price that you have to pay, Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And I think that it's not just the guys that are coming in 2026, it's the guys that are already here now. I mean, especially some of the guys at the most important groups in terms of physicality and strength and all of that, because there's a lot of raw talent and raw size, especially at the defensive line position this year with, Big Jaw and Little Jaw and all of those guys. So, these are guys who have a lot of size, like I said, have a lot of natural talent, but don't have a lot of college experience. And so their development can't be wasted. And I think if there's a place to especially be concerned with Benny Wiley's history, it is the defense, just because Oklahoma didn't exactly have a, nationally dominant powerhouse dynastic defense when Lincoln Riley was in charge over there either. He was winning on the strength of his offense quite a bit. So I think it certainly matters a lot for 2026, maybe even more so than now, but it matters now. And I think that's why the weird timing, that's why they didn't wait it out for so long, for sure.
All right, we're going to be talking about USC and the NFL draft, also the UDFAs and where they might fit, and more, much more on our show. But first, for about 45 seconds, a brief word from one of our sponsors that we do business with here at the Voice of College Football.
You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link, financially contribute. You can make a difference here at the Voice of College Football. Use the Amazon link, financially contribute to the Voice of College Football without spending any
there,
same shopping experience. It's easy.
Move forward,
go to any video on any channel. Go to the description section and grab the link right next to the capital letters that say Amazon. Use that link, and Amazon will instantaneously convert to your account settings history.
All right, before we move forward with the show, I want to show you something else, and that is that here at the Voice of College Football, we now have a website. Yes, how is that? So we have a website, vocfb.com. And so we're writing articles. We have a written website to bring to you. There it is. So we have this new Voice of College Football website. You can scroll down, lots of articles. Obviously, we launched a week ago. We launched on the Thursday of the NFL draft. We launched on Thursday afternoon, just before the first round of the NFL draft began. And you can see on the left, you have the list of the various Voice of College Football shows that are on for this day, this given day. You'll get that every day you go to the website. You get the news, forums, channels, shows, hosts, writers, other items. You see the social media icons upper right-hand side, but plenty of content. See all these stories left, right, and center. It's new at vocfb.com. That is the Voice of College Football website. So you come here to listen to myself and Ethan on our USC show and our other USC shows as well Tuesday night. And some of you come here for shows for other non-USC teams. Well, we talk a lot about college football on the air on these broadcasts, but we now have a written website, vocfb.com. Articles every day, 24/7. It's a website totally devoted to college football and nothing else. So vocfb.com, make that a daily stop for coverage from the people you know here at the Voice of College Football. All right, so we got our commercials in, or at least we got in one, technical difficulties on the other. So now, Ethan, USC in the NFL draft. So Jalen Smith, day 3, round 2, he gets into the top 100. That had to be a really big, pleasant surprise. I don't think most NFL draft experts thought that Jalen Smith was going to rise that high. And what a treat for him. Like, he goes to be with Kalen Bullock. They can talk and reminisce, and they can learn from each other. It's the USC Texans, the Houston Trojans. Take your pick. I would think that Jalen Smith really hit the jackpot there with his selection at number 97.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that he definitely certainly went sooner than I expected. I was expecting Woody Marks to go before him, and I was expecting him to be a day 3 pick and maybe Woody Marks to be a day 2 pick. But I was very excited when I found out that he was going, and especially going there to Houston. I think, honestly, what probably vaulted him up these draft boards is just his speed. He ran a 4.45 40 at the NFL Combine. So, that's something that you can't teach, obviously. It's just a very natural, unteachable skill that he inherently possesses. And I do think that, D'Amico Ryans out there in Houston had a good experience with Kalen Bullock last year. He came into Houston, played a big role immediately, starred pretty immediately, contributed to a playoff team. So I think that maybe influenced him to look a little bit longer at the next USC prospect that crossed his table. But yeah, I think it's going to be an absolute joy to see these two play together again. I think, I mentioned last week that I'm a big fan of Jalen Smith. He's just always such a positive guy, brings such positive energy, has a great story. And I think that he is someone that I'm always really rooting for. And I think him and Kalen Bullock are going to come into this with a lot of chemistry already. So if they see the field together, that'll be an advantage that both of them have. I think, if I remember correctly, I saw that Kalen Bullock was at Jalen Smith's draft party. So these two are, they're not just guys who were teammates at USC and are like coworkers or just kind of know each other. These are two great friends that have worked together pretty extensively. So I think it's awesome to see him go there, kind of the perfect situation for him. Awesome to see him get that recognition of getting picked day 2, being one of the top 100 picks, and wish him all the best and hoping that he succeeds. And I think because of that speed and because of D'Amico Ryans at the helm, one of the great defensive coaches in the modern NFL, I think that he will succeed.
Okay, and so continuing this theme with the USC Texans, the Houston Trojans, Woody Marks also lands in Houston, going at 116. And, just as a comparison, Marshawn Lloyd, He went third round. Woody Marks, fourth round. Do you think that Woody Marks falling to 116, while not necessarily unexpected on a larger level, do you think that Marshawn Lloyd's injury problems in Green Bay had anything to do with Woody Marks being a fourth rounder as opposed to a third rounder and a late day 2 pick?
That's an interesting question, Matt. I don't know entirely for sure, but I think if I had to guess, it likely had more to do with just the fact that they were two different prospects in terms of their kind of natural physical skills. I think that, production in college is one thing, but when it comes to the NFL draft, they look a lot more at kind of physical intangibles. And I think that Marshawn Lloyd was a guy who showed a lot of potential and showed a lot of bursts. Obviously, Woody Marks had the better college numbers, but he also had more touches and at USC and, kind of was, the Whittier, running back. And I think that Marshawn Lloyd is a guy who jumps off the screen for his physicality, his athleticism, and kind of his potential, even if the fumbling issues were kind of a problem, which was the main reason why he didn't touch the ball more 2 years ago. But I think that would be my guess over the injury issue. But, we're speculating a lot on this edition of the podcast about strength and conditioning coach issues. So I guess I can't rule it out entirely, but if I had to guess, it was just more, kind of natural athleticism and the difference between the two prospects there.
Yeah, my main thing about Woody Marks with the Texans is just that, we saw how bad that Houston offensive line was last season with C.J. Stroud constantly under pressure. Woody Marks is probably going to be that safety valve out of the backfield. He's going to catch a lot of dump off and check down passes when that pass rush comes at C.J. Stroud. So I think Woody Marks, he's gonna make his money in the NFL as a receiver out of the backfield more than as a setback taking handoffs. Certainly in this rookie season, I think that's going to be the role for him in Houston. All right, we continue. The third Trojan drafted, 257 picks. So Jonah Monheim, heard his name called. He goes to the Jacksonville Jaguars. And, this is one of those deals where, all right, he's not landing with a great NFL organization. We know the Jaguars are not one of the better run teams, but the positive element of this for Jonah Monheim, Ethan, is that, he should be able to compete for a spot on this 53-man roster. Like, that's the advantage that, you go to a place where the offensive line room is stacked. Like, you go to the Detroit Lions, good luck getting a spot. You're not going to stick probably on the Lions, but in the Jaguars, Jonah Monheim, pretty good chance he can actually make this thing work in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I also think that though it's not a very proven offense, it's still an exciting one. I mean, they traded up to get that second pick and draft Travis Hunter. And, as far as anyone in Jacksonville saying, he is going to play both sides of the ball. So we'll see him out there on offense, barring any major changes between now and the start of the season. And then Brian Thomas had a breakout year last year, obviously. And Trevor Lawrence is still Trevor Lawrence. He's still got a lot of potential. So it's like you mentioned, he has a great chance of breaking into an offensive role. And if he does, he's going to be seeing the field with a lot of these young, exciting players. So it is an exciting situation for him in that regard. And also he is linking up with a former Trojan because Chuma Udoga is also on that line, USC class of 2019, former Trojan offensive lineman. So he's at least got some familiarity with somebody there. Hopefully they can kind of connect and talk about their experiences. And, Udoga is not a guy who's been around in Jacksonville for a while. He just signed this offseason. So it's not like he can tell Jonah Monheim too much about Jacksonville, but he has been around a couple of extra months, so they can help each other adjust and, kind of trade secrets. Hopefully the Trojan family is always strong. So I assume they'll help each other out and both try to compete for starting spots on that line.
All right, let's move to the UDFAs, and it's always worth reminding that just because you don't get drafted, like, that doesn't mean your career's over. It's never going to take off. And one of the things about being a UDFA is that you make the negotiation with a team. You're choosing. you're searching out where's the best fit. And I think the UDFAs for USC, they all found good fits. They all found franchises where I can look at that and say, hey, there's a possibility that they could stick on the roster. Ethan, the UDFAs you're most excited about after the draft?
I think that there's a few that stick out to me. I think I'll bring up John Humphrey and Greedy Vance just because they're going to Vegas with Pete Carroll. I think that anytime you see a Trojan connection, that's really exciting. So I'd hope that they can break through with him and kind of get that old school USC experience and see what it's like to play under him. I think it's also good to see Easton Mascarenas-Arnold find a home just because he was so integral to our defense last year and had, led the team with 95 tackles. I think the guy I'm most excited for personally is Eddie Czaplisky, just because, he was the nation's best punter last year, Ray Guy Award winner, which he was USC's first Ray Guy Award winner, and the second first-team All-American, after Tom Malone in 2003. And so, we'll be seeing him on that Wall of Fame later this year probably. But he was just a guy for me personally that made punting exciting, which I know I'm coping really hard because we had our offensive struggles last year and I had to find something to get excited about. But he was a guy who, made a typically very boring and very frustrating play kind of exciting for Trojan fans. I think I saw that he had 25 punts that pins opponents inside the 20 and then 10 inside the 10 and 4 inside the 5. So anytime that he stepped up to, punt the ball, you knew you could be seeing one of the most beautiful punts you've ever seen. And so he was a guy that kind of helped me appreciate the art of punting a little bit more than I did initially. I subscribe to Isaac Punts here on YouTube now after, watching Eddie play. And so I'll be excited to see him kind of try his hand. He's going into a situation in Kansas City where they already have a guy, it's Matt Areza, who obviously had an incredible college career, was kind of a generational talent at the punting position, but then had all of those allegations, was out of the NFL for a couple of years, now is back in the NFL. So there's not a clear path to start, but he is the best punter in the country. And I think that if he's cut, he's going to have opportunities elsewhere. So I'm excited to see what happens in Kansas City. I don't think that it's entirely out of the question for him to end up there. And I don't think that, but I also think that if he doesn't end up there, he'll have opportunities elsewhere. And yeah, I think one story in particular that kind of really endeared him to me is, I'm not 100% sure what game this was, so don't quote it on me, but my educated guess is that it was against Notre Dame because I remember it being pretty late in the season. But there was a play where he punted and it was down like inside the 5, close to the end zone, but it was called back. And then he punted again, and it was a perfectly good punt. I think it was down inside the 20, but he spiked his helmet in frustration. He was so mad. And I was like, that's a punt that 90% of punters in the country would be thrilled with, especially because he'd gotten a 15-yard penalty the play before. And I was like, a guy who is kind of that much of a perfectionist and that much of a competitor that he wants to put the ball inside the 5 every time and got that frustrated for 10 yards of field position difference. That's the guy I want as the punter on my team. So he's electric, at a position where there's not too many electric players. I personally think he's electric, and I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, you know what? I think that offers some insight into why he negotiated a UDFA deal with the Chiefs. He wants to test himself against the best. He wants to be surrounded by a winning culture. He might not stick on that Chiefs roster, but just having that experience, being in Camp Kansas City, that probably is going to serve him well. Let's not go right to the Cleveland Browns. Let that not be your first NFL stop. Let's just smell the air of a winner, of a champion first. Go to Kansas City, just absorb that, and he's gonna find a landing spot, right? He's just way too good not to. So it seems to be the philosophy was not, can I stick on this roster? It's just, hey, let me be exposed to the right NFL culture so that when I get kicked, if I get kicked to another org, I can bring that culture to the new team that I'm joining. So that the perfectionist mindset that you accurately noted, with Sablichki, like that seems to be explain the motivation, the reasoning in his thought process for why he would go to the Chiefs. Jamil Muhammad, Los Angeles Rams. Now, that's another, to me, a great fit, because when you think of the Rams, you think of defensive line, and obviously Coach Henne is no longer there. Eric Henderson's no longer there, but nevertheless, like when you think about the Rams over the past decade, you think of Cooper Kupp, but of course he's now in Seattle with the Seahawks. And you might think of a few other offensive players, but in terms of a position group that the Rams have made the best and have set the gold standard, it's defensive line. It's getting after that quarterback. So Jamil Muhammad, if you're going to the Rams to be a pass rusher, like Sablichki wanting to be a punter on the Chiefs, you want to be the best. You want to be among the best. You want to be surrounded by the best. You want to be surrounded by winning excellence. That seems to be the thought process there. I'm really excited about Jamil Muhammad. And of course, he gets to stay in LA. He doesn't have to pack his bags and relocate as well. So that's a nice little bonus, kind of like Tuli Tuipulotu making it with the Chargers. He didn't have to leave town as well. In terms of the NFL draft and other stories, we have to touch on, we briefly alluded to this, John Humphrey and Grady Vance there with Pete Carroll. So Trojans coaching Trojans. What do you think of Pete Carroll's NFL draft with the Raiders? Obviously, the big decision, not trading out of number 6, but taking Ashton Jeanty with that pick. But then the Raiders did trade down later to get more pieces, and that's something that Carroll did with John Schneider and the Seahawks. Your overall impressions of Pete Carroll's first NFL draft as the coach of the Raiders with Tom Brady and general manager John Spytek?
The pick of Ashton Jeanty to me feels similar to the Jaguars trading up for Travis Hunter. It's a bit of a risk in the sense that you're not getting a guy like a Abdul Carter, who's not only, an exciting talent, but a guy who people are pretty certain is going to translate into the NFL. Ashton Jeanty is obviously put up one of the greatest running back seasons in college football history, but he was also at Boise State. So anytime, you're at a smaller school like that, there's a little bit of uncertainty there. But I think Ashton Jeanty is also one of the most well-known, one of the most well-liked, one of the most exciting players in the draft. And I think it's exciting to see him get another star running back that, he can kind of build the identity of the Raiders around. He's obviously famous for working with Marshawn Lynch for many, many years, including, and then Marshawn went to the Raiders. So it's like the NFL is all a circle, I suppose. But I think in that regard, it's really exciting. I think it'll get a lot of Raiders fans really excited. I think, Pete was on Twitter the morning of, kind of posting a bunch of GIFs with no context and trying to, get people interested and trying to get people speculating about what he might do and get them, excited. And he made the exciting pick. He kind of delivered. He didn't stir everybody up on what he was going to do and then stay at 6 and draft an offensive lineman that, and nobody had heard of or something like that. Like he went out and got a guy that's probably one of the most famous and one of the most exciting players in the draft. Probably would have won the Heisman if Travis Hunter, wasn't in college football this past year. It took a generational Shohei Ohtani type, the football version of Shohei Ohtani, playing like a first-round draft pick on both sides of the ball to beat out, one of the best running backs in the history of college football. So I think from that perspective, it's exciting. Obviously, have to wait and see a little bit on the development side of things, just because he is coming from a smaller school. But it'll be interesting to watch at least, and it'll get some eyes on it. And I definitely trust Pete Carroll's judgment. He's a guy who's been around, seen a lot of prospects, seen a lot of running back prospects specifically, knows what it takes to be a great running back in this league. So I think it was a good pick, and I think that Raiders fans should be excited.
Yeah, what I liked about the Pete Carroll draft was that, trading down in the middle rounds to get more pieces, more swings, more bites at the apple. Like, the Raiders are in a position where they need a lot of bodies. And so trading down to get more picks, take more flyers on more prospects. Like, that was just shrewd drafting by Pete Carroll. As for the Genty pick, to me, and we don't know this for a fact, or at least I haven't heard Pete Carroll say this directly, but I think when Ashton Genty said, "Hey, I'm going to be the next Saquon, like, I'm going to have that kind of impact, I'm going to be that guy," I think that had to have attracted Pete Carroll. Like, if he was on the fence in terms of which guy to take at 6, and if there was some friction in the war room with Spytek and Brady about which guy to take at 6, that Ashton Genty talk about, I'm going to be the next Saquon, just in terms of having that level of impact, similar to what Saquon's had with the Eagles. Like, Carroll's always compete mantra, like, that just seems to fit hand in glove with what Ashton Genty did. Like, Ashton Genty is betting big on himself. He's not, trying to be quiet and under the radar. No, he's out there up front. That seems like a Pete Carroll type of personality. I have to think that certainly, if the Raiders were on the fence, that might have been the final tipping point to deliver Ashton Genty to the Raiders. It's going to be fascinating to see how that camp evolves in the summer. I'm going to be a lot more interested in the Raiders than I've been in basically 2 decades. And I know a lot of other USC fans feel the same way. All right, so other news of the past week, USC picks up a receiver in the portal. So, like, USC's gotten some reinforcements on defense. So now you add a receiver to the shopping list. Still waiting for that big, elite offensive lineman. That's still a need. But, like, receiver was definitely a box that had to be checked. Your impressions of this new receiver USC is getting from Utah?
Quick little fun fact I want to point out, Matt, before we move on, just about the Raiders that I thought was kind of interesting, is that at pick 213, they picked Tommy Mellott, who's a quarterback out of Montana State. And then 2 picks later, they picked Cam Miller, who's a quarterback out of North Dakota State. They were the 2 opposing quarterbacks in the FCS National Championship game. So it's got to be interesting being the 2 guys that were competing for the highest glory in the FCS and then getting picked 2 picks apart by the same team and now having to compete for, a spot in that quarterback room. Got to be kind of interesting. So it'll be interesting to, on a more micro level for the more dedicated Raider fans to kind of watch that rivalry play out. My money's on Tommy Mellott. I think he was one of the more exciting players in the FCS. And I have some family in Montana, so I paid a little bit more attention to him than everybody else probably. But, he's a real dynamic runner and a real exciting player and really beloved out there in Montana. So I think that I'll be pulling for him over Cam Miller, but it'll be a fun little dynamic nonetheless. But anyways, you asked about the wide receiver pick. I think it goes back to kind of what I was saying a couple weeks ago about the wide receiver room. I felt that they would add to the wide receiver room in the spring portal, but I also felt that it wasn't going to be a guy who was going to step in and start. I felt like it was going to be a depth piece, and that's really what this is, because they went out and got Zacharias Williams. And he played at Utah last season. He was a freshman, played in 10 games, so kind of got into the mix a good bit, but only had 10 catches on the season and 3 rush attempts on the season, 117 yards total. He did have one big game against UCF where he had 6 catches for 72 yards and then 2 carries for 11 yards. So kind of most of his yardage was amassed in that game. But yeah, and he has lots of eligibility remaining. He's a guy with decent size, but not overwhelming size. He's 6'2", 196 pounds. So I think that it's kind of exactly like I was expecting. They got a guy to hopefully develop behind Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane, and a guy that played at a big program, had a chance to contribute a decent bit this year at Utah, but believes in USC. He's originally from Carson, so he's a SoCal guy. But yeah, it's I'm feeling good because I'm 2 for 2 on position groups that I thought they'd target. I said linebacker and I said wide receiver, and they went out and got a linebacker and they went out and got a wide receiver. So yeah, I think, similar to the other 2 guys, all 3 very similar pickups, not guys that are going to step in and start, but they are guys that do have some potential, did come from some bigger programs, and have a lot of time at USC to develop for sure.
Yeah, you've been nailing your shots. You've been calling your shots on the portal in terms of which position groups USC is going to pick up. Ethan Inman, just check mark after check mark. If you want to compare it to Babe Ruth in Game 3 of the 1932 World Series, feel free. Ethan Inman calling his shot and hitting the 450-foot home run. I think one thing to note about Zacharias Williams coming over from Utah is that, he didn't have Cam Rising throwing him the ball last season because, of course, Cam Rising with more health problems, just his snake-bitten final 2 years. If only Cam Rising was hurt in 2022 and not 2023, USC might have had a college football playoff appearance. Well, that's another conversation for another day. But the point is that he didn't have elite quarterbacks throwing him the ball in Utah. Now you go to a Lincoln Riley offense. So I'm sure that part of the lure, part of the attraction was, hey, I'm going to go to a more souped up passing attack. I can make more of an impact. That had to be part of the selling point that USC could make to Zacharias Williams. So, if the statistical production wasn't there, well, he was not in a position to really do a whole lot since Utah's passing offense was hamstrung the whole season. Like we saw that watching Utah labor through a lot of difficult games and not being kind of the normal Kyle Whittingham program we're used to seeing. So there could be hidden untapped value in this particular transfer portal pickup for USC. Any other spring notes, after spring practice, after spring ball, other big picture topics, tension points, discussion points, Ethan, that you wanted to hit on before we close down our show here at the Voice of College Football?
Feels like everybody's talking about Benny Wiley these past couple of days, Matt. So not too much else coming out, I fear.
Yeah, I mean, just, the timing of that move, that's what's going to get a lot of people talking. I think on that topic of timing, let's step back a little bit and go back 1 year. And this might be instructive for folks at USC, or if you're watching from another school's vantage point. Remember that Alex Grinch got sacked in early November of 2023, and USC played its last game on November 18th. And because USC did not make the Pac-12 championship game in 2023, so USC's regular season ended earlier than just about every other major power conference team's regular season did. Most regular seasons, not counting the conference championship game, end on Thanksgiving weekend. Well, USC's season ended earlier. And we talked about this at the Voice of College Football. Now, you weren't here, but I was here with Mark and Tim Prangley when we did our show a year ago, and we were talking about what's the timetable, what does the clock look like, and USC maybe could get ahead of the competition for that December transfer portal in late 2023 if Lincoln Riley moves quickly and hires a new defensive coordinator to replace Alex Grinch in that window between November 18th and Thanksgiving and the end of the regular season. Getting ahead of the curve, having your defensive staff all aligned so that you can really go after that December 2023 transfer portal window. But as we all know, Lincoln Riley took his time. He was patient. He was deliberate. He didn't just try to cram someone in quickly. He wanted to take some time, and he got D'Anton Lynn as a result of being patient. He waited for the Chip Kelly situation to unravel at UCLA. D'Anton Lynn realizes, oh, this is a sinking ship. I need to look elsewhere. Lincoln Riley jumps in, poaches him. That worked out really well. So taking a little extra time to make your move and get the right alignment, that can often work to your benefit. It's time is of the essence, and it's imperative in much of life. But sometimes, and this is also about the insanity of having the portal and the playoff and the bowl game and the early signing period all crashing together in early December. It's not as though you can do everything, or it's not as though if everything doesn't happen, it's hard to put all the blame on the coach. That because the calendar is just so overloaded in December, a lot of the time coaches have to make choices. They have to make trade-offs. Well, I'd like to have my preferred coach, but that means I'm not going to be able to hit the portal in December as much as I'd want to. I have to make my play in the spring. So that's what Lincoln Riley did at the end of 2023 and into that offseason. He waited to get the right defensive coordinator, and then he waited to hire Eric Henderson. Eric Henderson, he brought him aboard in January of 2024 after the NFL season ended with the Rams. We would all agree it was worth it for Lincoln Riley to take a little extra time there to get everything in alignment. So that is the parallel with this, with Benny Wiley. Chad Bowden was focused on shoring up recruiting. That was his first order of business. And we can look at the results. Pretty darn good, right? Number one class in 2026. The idea that he could fix the recruiting and take care of the strength coach all at once, that might have been too much to handle at one time. It might have been too much for players in the room to deal with. Just get that recruiting on track. Start recruiting Southern California, build out a staff, establish the relationships with high school coaches that Lincoln Riley was neglecting to a certain degree, or if not neglecting, he just wasn't hitting the mark the way he should have. So Chad Bowden waits, he focuses on the recruiting first, and then he waits to make this personnel move. So that is the lesson, everyone, that you would like to do, in a perfect world, you would like to do everything all at once. Of course, no one can debate that. Of course you want to do everything all at the same time if you can. But usually in college football, things being what they are, you don't get to do everything exactly all at once, wrapped in a neat, tidy little box. Taking the time to focus on first things first, recruiting, and then handle an off-season personnel issue. And here's the other element to all of this. We saw USC did not have a spring game. Nebraska, several other programs did not have spring games. In the era of the 12-team playoff, with teams playing 16, as many as 17 games, they're going to play in the national championship game. More games are being played. We are seeing the de-emphasis of spring football specifically as a really important bellwether measuring stick moment for a college football program. At the programs that were playing deep into January, their players need to rest. And so spring workouts just don't have the centrality that they used to. And the spring game has instantly become, less important through USC's decision, through Nebraska's decision, the decisions of other programs that did not go through with a spring game. Just making sure you have your guys fresh, rested, and ready for summer preseason camp. That's going to be more commonplace. I'm not going to say it's going to be the universal industry standard, but it's going to be more prevalent. It's going to be more the working modus operandi, the way programs see themselves. Let's just have everyone healthy for summer, and spring's just not going to have that same centrality that it used to. That's another way in which we can appreciate the Benny Wiley decision made by USC's football ops. That is just another piece of the puzzle in this rapidly changing time, in this new era of NIL and the transfer portal. All right, Ethan. So another week, lots of interesting news. Just before we sign off, any final thoughts? A lot of people were caught off guard by the Benny Wiley news, but we've spent the better part of this hour talking about that. When the story hit the headlines compared to now, you've had 24 hours to think about it. I've had 24 hours to think about it. Does the way you process the story, has it changed in these 24 hours? Have things that you've tossed around in your mind, do they kind of hit a little bit different now compared to just when this was an instant headline on Tuesday afternoon?
I think kind of like I mentioned at the top of the show, my initial reaction was one of surprise just because I knew about the relationships that he had with the players, kind of like you said. But I think going back to, the changing timelines and everything, I remember Steve Sarkisian, when Texas canceled the spring game, saying something along the lines of, we need to start treating the offseason more like OTAs in the NFL. So I guess, though this may have been a more troubling timeline in the past, I could see it making a decent amount of sense. Obviously, they do have a bit of a break between, the end of spring practice and the start of summer practice. And like you said, they probably are taking their foot off the gas just a little bit in the spring, and then ramping up a little bit harder over the summer, because they're trying to have that longevity to be able to play in the college football playoff. That's everyone's goal, especially when you're a big program like USC, who has the expectations like the USC fans place on USC. So I don't know. We can never be certain, but I think while it seems a little late still, it's not the worst timing in the world. And I do think that it's especially not the worst timing to be looking for a new hire, given that, you're putting a little bit less attention on the current players because they're all, kind of going on their break, and you can kind of focus on more, like you said, more staff stuff, more just kind of organizational stuff. Every other college team around the country is doing the same thing. So, strength coaches around the country are going to be a little bit more available for a call here in the coming days. But it'll be a storyline to keep following for sure. I'm sure, in the next couple of weeks, in the next podcast or two, we'll have a new name to talk about. So, it's still a bit of a surprise, but I think the more time that I get with it, the more that I can see the kind of future focused influence of the decision making, and the more that I see a path forward for USC for sure.
Yeah, my final thought on this and on our podcast, on our show tonight here at the Voice of College Football, is simply that, if this was a season in which the expectation was, hey, USC has to win 11 games, has to make the playoff, has to absolutely achieve at the Pete Carroll 2003 through 2008 standard, then this would be, I think, a source of alarm and concern. But because USC is not expected to be that, elite top tier team this season, that, the cavalry's coming next year, but all the pieces might not be in place this year. And like 9-3, I think, is the consensus in terms of where this team needs to be at the end of 2025, because this is not one of those all chips in the middle of the table type seasons. We all know what that looks like and feels like. This season is not that. You can afford to make this kind of move now. But if this was an all-in season, making this kind of move, that would feel a lot different compared to how it does now. All right, folks. So we want to apologize again for the late start. That will not happen next week, I can assure you. So our apologies here at the Voice of College Football. But remember, we now have a written website, and it's pretty simple: vocfb.com. Rah, rah, rah. vocfb.com, the Voice of College Football's written website. We launched last week, 24/7, 365. You're getting at least 4 articles on the site every single day, and that's not dropping off on the weekends. Every single day, so you're getting at least 28 articles every week on nothing other than the sport we all love, college football. So get on over to vocfb.com. We have a team of writers, and one of the things we're trying to do here is, when people write about stuff, they're going to carry that over to these broadcasts, and on these broadcasts, we're going to talk about things. We can then write about them in greater depth and detail on a consistent basis at our website. So we're trying to marry the broadcast presentation of the shows you love right here with a written website, part of the expanding network that is the Voice of College Football. So for Ethan Inman, this is Matt Zemek. We will see you next Wednesday. Thanks for watching and reading the voice of college football. We'll see you next week.